Hi everyone, welcome to the Idaho Authors Showcase. My name is Janet Ravenscraft and I will be your host today. This show will be about authors and their stories. We'll find out about why they write and why this book. And then how they write. Do they use a computer, a laptop? Are they longhand? Are they recording? When they write. Are they writing daily? Do they set a time? Maybe it's the middle of the night. And what they write. Is it fiction or nonfiction? Do they like romance or sci-fi? Motivational or is it scary? Thank you all for joining us today. Now get a cup of something, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to the Idaho Author Showcase. I'm Janet Ravenscraft, your host, and today our guest is Troy Lambert. And his book is actually in ebook form, so that's why we have it in this form here on the tablet, called Typewriter Repair Shop, right?
Correct.
Perfect. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
That's great. So tell me a little bit about this book here and why you chose only to deliver it in an ebook form.
Well, partially the reason it's only an ebook form is it's a novella, so it's relatively short. It's about 20,000 words. So it'd make a relatively small book. Also, because the format really lends itself to ebook promotions and low price type things on Amazon, which is really good for branding and kind of getting the word out there
On that one.
about basically my name and different books.
In different books. So this is how many books? Because I know you've written
This is number 10.
Number 10, okay. And so when did you start writing? When did you publish your first book?
Well, I published my first book. I published a collection of short stories called Broken Bones, it was published in large part because that was the beginning of the ebook revolution type thing, and doing some self-publishing and stuff like that. And every self-published author that I know was told the first thing you do is release a collection of your short stories and get your name out there, and then you release your first novel. So there are several people that I know in the author realm that did the exact same thing I did at around the same time.
Around the same time.
And so that was in about 2009, 2010 is when I initially did that one.
So you're in your 6th year or so
right.
of writing. And then, so have you always wanted to write? Is that something you've been doing since you were, elementary school and you wrote it up and stapled?
I always wanted to write. When I was a kid, I knew even at 14, I stated very clearly that I wanted to be a writer. And of course, everyone that was a career counselor or anyone at my school basically said, that's very cute, you're a very good writer, you're very creative, but what are you going to do for money? And so I, of course, bought into that and searched around, went to school, searched around for different careers, things like that, and nothing really worked. And it wasn't really until about 10 years ago when I started to figure out there were actually ways to make a living as a writer. Not just with fiction, but with other stuff.
Yeah. Were you still writing in the meantime? And
yes.
And journaling or blogs, things like that?
Tons and tons of horrible short stories, horrible novels. Some of them will never see the light of day. So yes, I was always writing. I just never learned how to actually take it to the level where I actually made a living at it or actually made any money with it.
There you go.
So I submitted some really terrible things to some places, and I should apologize for those things.
Apologize now because
yes.
But I was going to say most writers, that some of that stuff you have to work yourself through, and what I've heard from the writers and the authors I've been interviewing is that that's the thing. It's writing. It's just writing. You need to get that stuff out there. Even the not so good stuff or what you wouldn't really consider anything you would publish, but still, just the writing portion of it.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like the book The Outliers. You need 10,000 hours of anything to really become accomplished at it and to become what you'd call a virtuoso or really good at it. And for a writer, 10,000 hours means about 1 million words.
Wow.
So many, many writers really come into their own in their 30s and 40s, and part of the reason for that is by that point you've written a million words of really bad stuff. And so now you can finally write something good. The other aspect of it is you really need to find your writer voice. And most people that are young, it's rare. Sometimes young people can figure that out, but for most younger people, they can't really find the writer voice. They're trying a little bit of everything.
Well, and yeah, try to write like somebody else and change your voice,
Right.
and you can tell. So I think
Right.
everybody, oh, I can write that. Let me try to write like that. And like you said, finding that writer's voice.
Right. I mean, there's two aspects of it. There's writing in your writer's voice, which is the writing place where you're the most comfortable. And for me, that's suspense thriller. I've written several things, like I wrote some fantasy stories, and they all turned out to be suspense thriller fantasy stories, and all that type of thing. So that's where my home happens to be. But it took me a while to actually figure that out.
And to
That
own it.
suspense thriller is my voice. And the other part of it is that typically people write from the heart, and especially their first few books, because it has to be the story that only you can tell. And so people write it from their hearts. Well, sometimes when you're really young, you don't really have much in there yet to write.
You don't
You
have it.
think you do, but you don't have a lot of life experience, a lot of things out there to write, so your writing doesn't resonate as deeply. Either that, or you're just, frankly, afraid to write what really needs to be written.
Well, and like you said, to hear that, and not everybody, it's like not everybody can be, an engineer or can be a doctor. It's not everybody's going to be a writer. And
Absolutely.
it takes all kinds to do that side. So what's your writing process? Do you write every day so many words?
Sure.
I know some
actually,
people have a number that they have to write every day, like so many words per day, and some are, I write when I'm inspired, or every day I write for an hour or whatever. So that's why I just like to hear, and that's kind of like what the audience wants to hear. They want to hear what writers. This show is about writers and all the different kinds and ways to do it.
My personal opinion is that you need to write something every day
Okay.
if you're going to call yourself a writer. Now, there's people that argue with that with me and say, I am a writer and I don't have to write every day. And I say, yeah, you're right, you don't. But if you don't, you're not going to be as sharp and you're not going to be as good at it. The way you're going to hone your writing process by writing every day. The other part of it is, for me, is that it changes your mentality, because writing is very much an addiction.
Oh.
So if you do it every day, pretty soon you won't not be able to do it every day. If you don't write for an extended period of time, bad things will happen in your brain. Because I personally think it changes the chemical balance in your brain. It changes you into someone different. So do you need to write something, a specific number of words every day, or a specific genre, or a specific thing every day? Not necessarily. For me, I usually like to do a lot of writing in the morning. That's when my best creative process time is in the morning. Then I do more other things in the afternoon when I get that mushy brain about 2 or 3. I don't really want to be putting words on paper.
So that's when you do your blog or you do your newsletter.
Right. And I write for all kinds of technical blogs and stuff like that. And that's stuff that you can just blah, blah, blah. I can spew stuff out for those particular type of things. Well, right. You have an opinion, or you're writing about a particular topic. So it's not something that's like so much of a creative process as more it's regurgitating research.
Right.
Which is a much different type of writing. So that's the way the process works for me. There are times when I have a certain word count, or I'll put a deadline on myself to write certain things. So I've written 10,000 word days. I've done the 1,500 words in an hour, all those kind of things. It just depends on where you're at.
Just to kind of test yourself, or to see, or because somebody challenged you, or...
I mean, usually on an average day, depending on what I'm doing and what I'm writing and what I have going on for nonfiction or job-related type stuff or things like that, I write 3,000 to 4,000 words a day.
Okay, so that's you just kind of know that's kind of do it. Now, I'm assuming you do everything on a laptop. Do you do any longhand? Do you do any audio?
No, I tried to do audio, to do text to or speech to text type stuff, and I don't really do well at that. I express myself much better if I just fall into that writing hole, because what I basically find out is my voice can't keep up. I type so fast that it can't keep up with my brain, and so I end up missing things or whatever. When I get into typing, if I'm typing my own stuff and creatively, I'm typing 100 to 120 words a minute at various times, and there's just no way I can keep up with that pace.
That on that side. Now, do you find also that you edit as you're typing too?
Absolutely not.
Oh, you don't? You just type and don't even...
No, I used to go back and edit, or like when I was in the writing process, go back and edit different piece of what I found was that slowed my process significantly. The first draft is always going to be crap, no matter how much you go back and try to edit those things. And so for me personally, I found that getting the first draft down was the most important thing. You can always go back and edit the story later, but you cannot edit what's not on paper yet.
If you don't get it out there, and you don't at least, like you said, have some kind of form, some kind of outline on it, then it's kind of hard to, and
Right.
Especially if you miss those thoughts.
Well, and I'm extremely in favor of writing fast drafts.
Oh,
Your
okay.
first draft should be written very quickly.
Very quickly.
When somebody tells me they've been writing on a book for 3 years, I cringe inside.
Oh, that's
Because
so
I
bad.
know that the editing process is going to be harder. And here's why. You
Well, you know
write
what?
from your heart.
Okay, right from your heart.
Okay. And how much has your heart changed over the last year?
Well, let's hold that thought.
Okay.
Because we're going to take a break here. We'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back to the Idaho Authors Showcase. And my author here is Troy Lambert, and we were in the middle of a thought. So let's finish that thought on writing from the heart.
Okay, what I was saying was you write from the heart, and if you think about how much your heart has changed even over the last year, that's my primary argument for writing fast drafts. Is if you're writing from the heart and your heart changes in the middle of your writing is also going to change. And so that's going to prolong your editing and rewriting process. So it's going to make it much more difficult. Not only that, but the publishing industry is all about what have you done for me lately. And so writing and publishing works quickly, especially in today's market, is what sustains your brand and builds your brand.
Keep you going.
So that's what keeps you going.
Yeah.
So it's very important, in my opinion, to write the first draft very quickly.
Very quickly. So let's talk about publishing a little bit. So you self-publish, publisher, hybrid.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Yes. So all
Yes
of the
to
above.
all of those things. Basically,
all of the above.
I'm what you'd call a hybrid author. The book that's on the screen now, Stray Ally,
Okay.
was published with a publisher, Tiergar Publishing, out of Ireland.
Oh,
I've been
okay.
published by Wild Wolf Publishing, which is in the UK, and I've been published by Untold Press, which is out of Florida, and I've also self-published.
Okay.
So, there's various other projects that I've had short stories published in or things like that. So I've done a little bit of both.
What do you like? Which one do you like best?
It depends on the project.
Does it? Okay.
And here's why. Is basically the publishing industry is a pay now or pay later type game.
All right.
If you're going to self-publish, you need to source an editor. You need to source a cover designer. You need to source a formatter. You have to do all that administrative work yourself.
Right.
Now, you do retain a huge amount of control over what your book looks like, how it's edited, how it's marketed, all those different kinds of things.
But very time consuming.
But it's very time consuming. If you hand it off to a publisher, they generally source all those things and they pay for all those things at the outset. And then you pay for those in that you get less royalties later on.
later on.
So you're still paying for it.
Either
Make
way.
no mistake, you're still paying for it either way. One way you're paying now out of your own pocket. Later you're paying for it out of your own pocket. You're just paying for it later. And you do lose a certain amount of control. So it depends on the project.
Which project on that side? So, why was your decision to go with an Ireland publisher? And this is in print form, correct?
It's
Stray
in
Allies
it's
form?
in print and
Okay.
ebook form.
Okay.
And my decision to go with them was basically at the time I was working for them. I've done a lot of editing for them.
Oh, okay.
And they had asked me about a couple different books, and I had this book idea in the back of my head, and so I had written it. And so I decided, I'm going to go this route and send it off to them. So I've had a couple books published by them now at this point. And it was a very good fit. The cover designer did pretty much what I wanted them to do anyway, because I generally give cover designers a lot of license, even in my own personal self-publishing work, because they're the artists, I'm not, so they get to do their thing and I do my thing, and that's the way things work. So that worked very well for that book, and it has actually worked out extremely well to have that book with Tiergar, and it's sold very well.
And that is your ultimate goal anyway. Is
the ultimate goal? Well, the ultimate goal as an author really is to be read. You want somebody to read your books. The sales part of it is the money side that comes from people reading your books. But really what you're trying to do, for the most part as an author, is you have a story to tell.
You want somebody to
So
read.
you're trying to tell the story. There are people that are into literary writing, and they write in their journals or write these literary things, and then they put them away in a drawer, and they're ashamed, or they don't want anybody to read them, or they don't go to critique groups or anything like that to let anybody in on that process. And that's a completely different thing than what I'm doing. Is basically I have stories to tell. I primarily write genre fiction. Genre fiction is designed to sell. That's what it's supposed to do.
Well, and once you figured out what your voice was going to be, in the science thriller, then you know which direction you're going into.
Right, exactly. You know what direction you're going into. You generally know what genre it's going to fall into. You know those different things. It's fine to play around and experiment with things and do different things to see what happens as far as sales-wise and things like that. But those things are always a risk. So, I mean, that's part of the ball game.
It's part of the ball game. That's an interesting side of it, though. And to hear you're publishing, you've tried all of them. And so is there any one that you recommend, or does it just depend on what you're trying to accomplish at the time?
It depends on what you're trying to accomplish at the time. And for some people, what I would say for some people is that some people should not self-publish. And here's the reason.
Okay. I want to hear this one.
If you don't have the money to invest initially in an editor and a book cover, and you're trying to do all those things yourself, there's two different aspects to that hurt it. First of all, you can't edit your own stuff. I work as an editor. I cannot edit my own work. You become what's called word blind. And so I miss things in my own work.
I agree.
100%. The other part of it is, if you do it all yourself, it becomes a very narcissistic process. And people can tell when they read your book that it was all about you. And it's not all about you. In my personal opinion, it takes a village to create a book and to create a good book.
A tribe. I call it my tribe.
Right. It takes a tribe. It takes a village. It takes people other than yourself. And so if you're doing it yourself, it's a very narcissistic process, and it becomes obvious to the reader, and your work is going to suffer because of that.
Well, we won't grow if you do not take any input, or you get no input in on it, regardless if it's just an editor or if it's somebody that's a developmental side. So
absolutely.
I didn't even realize I was a hybrid publisher, because I didn't know what that meant until recently. So I've been telling them self-publish, so I'm changing that because I had a team. And what was interesting for me is, you're right, you cannot self-edit, because even though I edited my stuff, I had an editor, I had a proofreader, and I still, when I went to reprint it, I still had more edits to do, and errors and typos. It's like, really? How'd they get past all of us?
Well, and this is the thing with typos and errors and things like that in books. From an editor's perspective, and even from a reader's perspective, you ask a reader, you go, how many errors would you tolerate in a book, let's say, before you put it down? And they say 5. Okay. And you say, I wrote a 70,000 word book.
Yeah.
And you allow for 5 errors. That's about a 99.2% accuracy rate. That's a pretty high A. So there's very few other industries where you would hold someone to that standard, because you would say, well, if you make a mistake at work, how many mistakes should you get before they fire you? And or before they don't pay you for that hour, or whatever the case may be. And for the most part, people will be very forgiving of themselves. They're not very forgiving of publishers and authors. Yeah. So it
has been interesting, the feedback, because the things that people want to tell me about are the did you know that? Yeah. But thank you. And I'm I'm to the point that I just thank them. Thank you very much for the information. And if you find any more, just let me know. And I just take them. I have my proof that has 25, yellow stickies on it, are the ones that I just found going through the second time. It's like, okay, it is, but I have learned that's just part of the process.
Right. Right. And part of it is you could spend forever rewriting your first book because you're always going to go back to it and find
that doesn't
errors
sound
or a
fun.
place
Or
where
just
you could
this could
fix
sound
it.
better, but
Right,
I might want to do
exactly.
that. I just want to. I do just want to correct the big typos that if I can find them the second time through. So on that
Right,
side.
exactly. I mean, if you keep rewriting and re-editing your first book, you'll never write a second one because you won't have
true.
time. You'll run out of time.
Well,
And
because
so
the first one will
that's
never
just-
be done.
No. Well, no, your book is never done. It's just interrupted.
Oh.
When your book is published, that's when the story is interrupted. You're never done with that story.
Well, 'cause
Never, not really. Because you could keep refining it forever. Because again, your heart changes. So when you go through it the second time, you see, oh, this is different.
That's when you have to stop.
I could change this. No, you stop. You interrupt the process.
That's right, and that's
You push the baby bird out of the nest, let it fly, and then you move on. I haven't read my first book in forever.
I was going to say I could say that we don't want to do that. It's like that part there. That's been I really appreciate that because I like that standpoint of that. So let's just talk about for a minute about your favorite author. Do you have a favorite author? Who inspires you?
Easiest thing to say right off the top of my head is Dean Koontz is one of the ones I've read
I was
a
going to
lot.
say your suspense thriller, so yeah, that would make sense to me.
And Dean Koontz, Stephen King, stuff like that. But to say I have a favorite author is like, it's just like asking my favorite music. There's no way to narrow it down.
Well, but I always like to see if you even read. You know, if you read other people's stuff or not.
Oh, yeah.
When you write so much of your own, and that thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, yeah, because a writer who doesn't have time to read really doesn't have the tools to write. That's my personal opinion.
That's a good perspective on it.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Idaho Authors Showcase. And my guest author today is Troy Lambert. I really enjoyed our conversation. So here's a question that I like to ask all our authors, just because everybody has a different aspect of it. So what would you, advice would you give for aspiring writers out there, authors out there that, want to know where to start, what to do, that type of thing?
Typically, as soon as an author comes to me and says, I want to make a living as a writer, I tell them to do something else. Something more respectable, be an attorney, an ambulance chaser lawyer, something other than a writer. But writers happen to the best of families. And so if you're like me and you find that you really can't do anything else because you're not fit for anything else, then we'll talk about how do you actually go about being a writer and what that looks like. The other part that I always tell them is you need to adjust what you mean by make a living. Because if you think that you're going to have a Mercedes and a house in the suburbs and a wife and 2 kids and 1.5 dogs and the typical...
You're going to be in the bestseller list.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen for you. More than likely. If you do, you're an anomaly. So there's ways to make a decent living and be a mid-list author and eat groceries and things like that. And usually that involves doing more than one thing. Usually have more than one stream of revenue. Many writers still have day jobs, or if they don't have day jobs, they have something else that they're doing that's
the cash
allowing
cow,
them
something that's allowing them to
something that
supporting
allows them to make
supporting their
money.
writing habit.
Right, exactly. Because it takes a long time and a certain number of books before you get to the point where you're just living off of book royalties. And it just doesn't happen all that often. It can, and it's possible, but it takes a lot of work. So I tell them to adjust what you mean by make a living. Is an apartment good enough for you? A little townhouse, small yard, something more reasonable, because the likelihood that you're going to be that upper middle class range is pretty challenging.
Yeah, and there's things that come along with that. So, making those choices along the way of what you want to write when you can. So.
Right.
That's great advice.
It's kind of a thing of you become what I call a lifestyle entrepreneur. Is basically you're going to more arrange your work around your life instead of your life around your work. That means some sacrifices. That means you don't always have the same things that everybody else has, but at the same time, you're going to be a lot happier.
I was going to say, but if writing is the thing that you have to do, writing is what's in your blood, and you want to be it, then that's what you need to stick with, and find that like you said, that avenue that's going to be able to take care of both, and live with that and be happy with what with having that opportunity in there. So, what would you tell your readers? You have a reader base out there. What's your next book? When's it coming out?
Well, that's actually a good question. 'Cause I'm in the middle of writing two, but I have one that's kind of been a manuscript that's kind of been languishing out there, so it's probably going to be retitled and released sometime later this year.
Later this year.
That
okay.
one's already written. I'm working on a suspense thriller called that's a serial killer suspense thriller called 70. The first two chapters are 55 and 56, so you can guess kind of where it goes from there. There's going to be a lot of death and
So when you mean a series, is this the beginning of a series of serial killers, or like the first one, or is it just a book in itself?
maybe. This is one that I think may turn into a series, and I'm not sure who's going to survive the book. So I'm not sure who the main characters are going to be for the next one.
Or the next one. So that's
So.
interesting. So have you written one like that before? Not really.
No, not along this line. This is one that I've had the idea of a serial killer for a thriller for a while, and then was in San Francisco on the beach. The idea came to me and started writing.
And just started writing it on that side. That's interesting. And just that alone on that. So that's before the end of the year. Any information you want to share with your readers as far as?
You can always
Are you
find
gonna
me on
be-
my website, troylambertwrites.com. You can always email me from there to contact me, and just keep watching. I've got all kinds of new books and short stories and stuff like that coming out before the end of the year.
Oh, great. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate your side of looking at things, and especially as an accomplished author and writer, you come with that wealth of information that hopefully our audience has appreciated. So I thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I know. And so thank you all also for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the show today and that you got something out of it. And we look forward to you coming back and watching our show again. Thanks for watching.